Hello and welcome to First Friday Fives here on Go Big Bore or Go Home. I'm your host Sean, and this month we're going to talk about the 5 calibers that claimed the title of Most Powerful Handgun in the world. Also included is going to be the guns they were originally chambered in and 2 honorable mentions. But before we get started, let's lay down some guidelines that helped us shore up this list. Number 1. This is metallic handgun cartridges only. Sure, a rifle cartridge can be used in some handguns, and some handgun cartridges out there were originally rifle cartridges like the 3840 Winchester centerfire. But this is about handgun cartridges that were designed to raise hell out of a firearm that lacks a stock. Number 2. The specified caliber cannot be a cartridge that has not had factory ammunition made, nor a factory gun produced in that caliber. So wildcats, obscure cartridges, and cartridges without any SAAMI specifications that allow us to determine objectively what their power output is are disqualified. And number 3, please keep in mind that personal opinion will be playing a factor here. Muzzle energy may be the traditional measuring stick, but it doesn't always tell the full effectiveness on game, and in fact, number 3 and number 2 can flip-flop on their muzzle energy. With that, please know this is not a ranking list, but a timeline list. We're going back to where powerhouse metallic cartridge hand cannons became a thing and moving forward. I also want to point out that this list is open to debate, so if you disagree with us, that's all good, and you're welcome to share your thoughts in the comments below. After all, at some point, this is going to come down to opinion. So if you have something to share about this list, please feel free to do so. And with all that said, let's talk about world title holding cartridges. Coming in at number 5 is the first handgun cartridge to hold the title of the most powerful handgun in the world, and it's none other than the first cartridge to hold the title of Magnum, and I'm talking about the .357 Smith Wesson Magnum. When? 1935. The gun? The Smith Wesson Model 27. Length of title reign? 21 years. The .357 Magnum came about in the 1930s. It was an answer to the need for a more powerful self-defense handgun. At a time when Prohibition had helped to build organized crime, a handgun that could pack enough punch for police officers was desperately needed. The answer came from an unlikely direction: hunting. Elmer Keith, remember that name, you're going to be hearing it again, had been experimenting with large-frame 3844 Smith & Wesson revolvers. He was taking the .38 Special cartridge, which was designed for black powder, and using more modern, smokeless powders that could generate increased power from smaller amounts. The increased powder he used allowed Keith to use the handguns for hunting small to medium-sized game, and also necessitated the stronger revolvers that he was using. Smith & Wesson saw this as an opportunity to create a revolver for law enforcement that could bring them back a part of that market share. With the help of many like Elmer Keith and Philip Sharp, they created the first cartridge to generate awe-inspiring power and bear the title Magnum. It seems tame now, but in 1935, this was the handgun that ruled the roost when it came to power. It had stopping power to spare and could penetrate the barriers that the gangsters of the day were using, like their car doors and even some early body armor. And like Elmer Keith envisioned, it could be used for hunting. I have a friend who took a deer in the last few years with a Smith & Wesson 686. But unlike the rest of the calibers on this list, this was the last time that a cartridge that was designed for personal defense would hold the title of the most powerful handgun in the world. Next in at number 4 is perhaps the most famous handgun cartridge to ever hold the title, the .44 Remington Magnum. When? 1956. The gun? The Smith & Wesson Model 29. Length of title reign? 27 years. Now before we talk about how the .44 Magnum came about, I want to discuss a point of controversy. In 1956, Smith & Wesson released the Model 29, Ruger released its Black Hawk in .44 Magnum, and Great Western Arms released a single-action revolver, also chambered in .44 Magnum. So who got the first gun to market? Lots of people say Ruger on this one, but in reading Max Brasak's book, Ruger Revolvers, his research shows that the Model 29 did come out first in January of 1956, with Great Western Arms following them about 4 to 5 months later, and Ruger about 3 months after that. So despite my love of Rugers, according to Max, Smith & Wesson beat them to the market by about 8 months. The cartridge came about when a certain guy who liked to hunt with a handgun was experimenting, actually with the .45 Colt cartridge. If you guessed that I'm talking about Elmer Keith, you guessed right. He had been hot-loading his Colt single-action Army revolvers chambered in .45 Colt and using .45-70 bullets for their heavier weight. One day, he literally blew his Colt apart. He wrote to American riflemen asking for help, and they informed him of two things. First, that the .45 Colt used bullets that were around .451 inches in diameter, and the .45-70 bullets were larger at around .458 inches in diameter. In short, they were too big for his revolvers, so he should probably stop doing that. Secondly, they suggested that if he wanted a big bore cartridge with more power, the .44 Special brass of the day was stronger than the .45 Colt brass of the day, so maybe he should start there. And so he did, developing super hot loads that could take medium to large game with little trouble. He began to talk to both Remington and Smith Wesson about his brand new cartridge, and the two companies developed the ammunition and the gun, respectively, that would make Harry Callahan the most badass cop in the world come 1971. It's too bad old Elmer gave up on the .45 Colt. I mean, imagine if someone had developed that cartridge further. Or did someone in fact do that? Now, before I move on to the number 3 on the list, it's time for our first honorable mention. That cartridge is the .45 Winchester Magnum, A.K.A. the .45 Win Mag. This cartridge was developed to be a semi-auto, Magnum-powered .45 auto, and to its credit, it is just that. It was released in 1979, and for some in the handgun hunting world and silhouette shooting world, it was great. It was available in the LAR Grizzly 1911s, Thompson Contender single-shot pistols, and even the Wildy pistols. Oh, we'll get to those! But it never enjoyed the success of the .44 Magnum, partially because the muzzle energy of the SAAMI Specs is pretty much the same, so it didn't really outstep the .44 Magnum. Add in that it was harder to utilize since it was a rimless cartridge that head-spaced on the case mouth, and the .45 Win Mag gets relegated to being an also-ran. And in at number 3 is a cartridge that picked up where Elmer Keith left off. I'm talking about the .454 Casull. Win, 1983. The gun, the Freedom Arms Model 83. Length of title reign, 16 years. Quite possibly one of the longest in-the-wings wildcats of all time, the .454 Casull was the brainchild of Dick Casull, who generated a prototype cartridge and built his own prototype single-action revolver all the way back in 1957, first putting it in the public eye in a firearms magazine in 1959. The cartridge was developed by pushing the .45 Colt to its absolute limits, and those limits were very high. But it wasn't until Dick Casull partnered with Wayne Baker in the 1970s to develop Freedom Arms that the ball really started rolling on this cartridge. And in 1983, the .454 Casull was a factory reality that left the .44 Magnum behind. This was the first cartridge to really be a step beyond Magnum power in a handgun, and it excited handgun hunters the world over. There is nothing on this earth that has not been successfully hunted with the .454 Casull. It inspired others to not only push the limit of what a handgun could do, but how they could achieve such massive power, even using less pressure. I believe some guy in Cody, Wyoming had an idea about that. And it's time now for our second honorable mention. Released 2 years prior to the .45 Winchester Magnum in 1977, this monster did have the power to put the .44 Magnum back in the sock drawer. I'm talking, of course, about the one and only .475 Wildy Magnum cartridge and the Wildy Survivor and Hunter pistols. Cut down from .284 Winchester brass, this behemoth was designed for serious large-game handgun hunting. Its power level is comparable to the .454 Casull, but it can't outperform it. So, what is it specifically that keeps it as an honorable mention? Well, it's the fact that it's never had any SAAMI specs, and ammunition pretty much came only from Wildy. So it's difficult to really get a fair read on what power it did actually put out, especially considering that your best resource for ammunition was probably what you produced by reloading. Still, it's such a damn cool handgun, I have to recognize it as one serious badass. And moving on to the number 2 on this list is a cartridge developed mainly because Winchester was going to discontinue production of their .348 Winchester rifle cartridge. And that's none other than the .475 Linebaugh. Win, 1999. The gun, the Freedom Arms Model 83, again. Length of title reign, 4 years. While the .475 Linebaugh was actually developed in 1988, it wasn't until Freedom Arms released a Model 83 chambered in it in 1999 that it was officially out of wildcat status. Buffalo Bore had been producing ammo for a little while, and believe it or not, it is SAAMI certified. and the numbers put this cartridge just a bit up the power scale from the 454 Casull. As to its origins, the 475 line bob was developed when Winchester announced the discontinuation of the 348 Winchester cartridge because the 500 line bob was using that brass as a parent case. So John Linebaugh cut down 4570 brass, expanded the mouth, and voila, new cartridge. And it is a hell of a powerhouse. This cartridge has never had any trouble stopping anything that you can hunt, or that can hunt you. Packing big diameter heavy bullets at magnum velocities, this cartridge is a true giant of handgun power. What would make anyone want more? I suppose if they felt they had to reclaim the throne, so to speak, that might do it. And that brings us to our list's number 1 and current most powerful handgun in the world, the King Kong felling, dinosaur hunting, 500 Smith Wesson Magnum. When? 2003. The gun, the Smith Wesson 500. Length of title reign, 14 years and counting. This behemoth of a cartridge was an attempt on Smith & Wesson's part to reclaim the title of most powerful handgun in the world, which they had lost to the Freedom Arms Model 83 and the 454 Casull cartridge back in 1983. After 20 years of having to acquiesce to Wayne Baker, Dick Casull, and John Linebaugh, Smith & Wesson reclaimed their title by dwarfing all of the previous title holders substantially, and even having more power on tap than the madman of a wildcat, the 500 Maximum. While the Maximum has a .510-inch diameter bullet, the pressure maxes out at 50,000 psi. The 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum has a .500-inch diameter bullet, but it maxes out on pressure at 62,500 psi, and it can launch heavy bullets to insane velocities that will astound just about anyone. And with that much power on hand, it's unlikely there will be a cartridge ever made to outperform it, as it would require going over the 500 bore, making it a destructive device according to the ATF, or be so recoil laden that it really would be entirely pointless to shoot, not to mention insanely painful. Well done, Smith & Wesson, and long live the king. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoyed the list. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more content. And of course, remember, go big bore or go home.